being human to me is interaction, people, social. Whether it's giving or partying or whatever, I just love being with people. I am a supremely social being. And that's actually one thing, not to date the episode too much, but with like all the shelter in place stuff, I've had a lot of time to think about how does a personality like mine handle that. Zoom happy hours are a big one. But anyway, I'm getting off tangents here. Yeah, I think being human is just a lot of it has to do with our interactions and being able to interact with people. I think that it's just critical and it's core to our existence, really.
Welcome to the On Being Human podcast, where we believe transforming ourselves can positively transform society. Your host, Brandy Fleck, has the honor of exploring the human condition with real people who bravely share their personal stories of adversity, healing, joy, and more. If you're seeking empowerment, strength, and inspiration, listen in to engage and explore tough topics that help us humanize one another, understand ourselves better, spread love, and connect.
Welcome back this week to the On Being Human podcast. I'm your host, Brandy Fleck. Greg Tilton of New Orleans, Louisiana, narrowly escaped distracted driving. By that, I mean that he was in a car accident that the healthcare workers thought should have killed him. He walked away with an injured arm, the need for physical therapy, and a lot to think about. Greg is a husband, new dad, a podcaster, and a cinematographer. He opens up about an idyllic childhood and having a great life. He was living his life when tragedy struck and luckily walked away mostly unscathed. So what happens when you experience such an accident? Does it change your life? Does it make you closer to God? Greg genuinely tells us about being in shock, how it impacted him over time, and how he's moved on, sort of nonchalantly and happy-go-lucky, completely aligned with his excellent personality. From this episode, you'll get insight into how time helps us overcome fears produced by trauma, that miracles do exist, and that it's okay to be happy even if you've been through some crazy events. This episode is brought to you by On Being Human's indie podcast Roundup. Seeking answers from other humans to learn about the human condition brings a multitude of perspectives that we've only scratched the surface of here at On Being Human. Therefore, once a quarter, I'm dedicated to rounding up the best indie podcasts I can find that are similar to the content we're delivering to you. Perhaps these podcasts have overlap with our show, or perhaps they contain an extension of information that we haven't covered so far. The Summer Indie Podcast Roundup presented by On Being Human will be released at the end of June 2020. Go to onbeinghumanpodcast.com and sign up for our email list so you don't miss it. By doing so, you'll receive our free love mantra as well. As many of you know, Season 2 proper of the On Being Human podcast will wind down in July, but the fun doesn't stop there. You also won't want to miss post-season special collections we'll be putting together for you with distinct purposes. And be on the lookout for an educational series of blogs slated to start at the end of July 2020. Subscribe to the On Being Human podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Help us out by leaving a rating and review. You can also find this episode at onbeinghumanpodcast.com/episodes/048, where you'll also find all of Greg's links. Now, let's hear from Greg. Greg, welcome to the show today. How are you today?
Thank you so much for having me on, Brandy. I am doing great. Had a big full day of editing today, so it's nice to record something that I'm not responsible for.
Yeah, I bet. Well, this is going to be a really interesting interview. I'm super excited to have you here today. So real quick before we dive in, can you just tell us who you are and what do you do?
Yeah, so my name is Greg Tilton. I am a content creator in New Orleans. I hate saying it. It makes me cringe. It just feels so pretentious and nondescript. But my main income, my main hustle is film production, video production, editing, commercials, social media, narrative, documentary. We kind of do it all. Music videos, whatever. I think I said music video twice. But anyway, I do a lot of content creation. And in the last half year or so, I've expanded a lot more into podcast production. So that's been a big thing. The occasional writing, but I wouldn't say that's a main part. But yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Awesome. So you'd probably get a lot of social interaction in there, or no? Does that go with your personality as well as you'd like?
I don't want to go too off on a tangent here, but I mean, the kind of short answer is film production definitely. It takes a village to raise a child applies there, right? It takes a village to make a film, and it's just an inherently cooperative and crew-based work. You're generally not soloing. There's a lot of solo work out there, but most of the work I do is at least 4 or 5 of us working together, upwards of 100 plus.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just inherent to it. And with podcasting, that was actually, it kind of started as a fun hobby that became an experiment, especially as my shows started to develop, in taking a back seat and being more man behind the curtain and not dominating conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of hits both sides of it, I guess.
Yeah. Awesome. Very cool. Well, Greg, can you give us your life story? And I mean, this is big, your whole life story in 5 minutes or less.
Born, school in Metairie School in New Orleans, college in Virginia, film done. No. So basically, yeah, I was born and raised in New Orleans. My parents are both just inspirational figures to me. They are very accomplished physicians. I'm very proud to be their son. And in a lot of ways, that's always been a guiding force for me, trying to be as intelligent and thoughtful and educated as they are. And being raised in New Orleans is obviously very unique. You really don't appreciate it till you leave. When obviously during Katrina, I was in Texas for half a year, learned to appreciate New Orleans then for sure. Sorry, Texas, not for me. Virginia, went and got my history degree, came back here, bought a camera I couldn't afford and started working in film production. One of my dear friends, his brother-in-law, is my business partner. It's just kind of all, like everyone else, there's always kind of a wild trajectory. You never quite wind up where you think you're going to, especially our generation. Our degrees rarely have much to do with what we end up doing.
Right.
So, like I said, history degree to film production, I'm kind of a tech geek. I love reading about sensors and pixel counts and ISO and noise. And it's, I don't know, tech has always kind of driven me as a person in that way. I got into podcasting, and this feels all very rambly, but I guess this is kind of how my brain operates. But
Sure.
yeah, I mean, the long and short of it is born and cultivated by my city. Love creating, love working with people, love being back here in New Orleans. That's kind of it. I mean, most of my friends will tell you the first thing you'll learn about me is that I'm from New Orleans before you'll even know my name.
Gotcha. All right. Well, can you describe your personality for us just a little bit more so our listeners can really get to know who you are? Maybe give us an example of something that is just uniquely you.
I don't think it's unfair to say I can be a little self-absorbed. I don't think it means I don't care about people. I do care greatly about my relationships and my friendships. I think that my opinions and my thoughts are probably more interesting to other people than they are. But I love telling a good story. I think that's probably a unifying theme about me as a person, social interaction, my work. I just love telling stories. I'll tell you a stand-up bit I heard. I'll tell you some random thing from my childhood that you said reminds me of. I mean, if I had to describe myself in one word, it's storyteller. That kind of really encapsulates me as a person. And many people can find it aggressive and loud and obnoxious. And I like to think some people do find it mildly entertaining.
So, Greg, we're here today to talk about a near-death experience and perhaps more of a close call. I'm not sure of all the details yet, but what was your experience?
When you posted on Facebook, you were asking for people with stories. And I almost didn't answer. I felt like it was kind of ridiculous of me in some ways, but I was like, well, she's directly asking people, and I have something that quite fits the bill. And you also agreed to my one little stipulation I'd like, which I'll get to later. But I was actually in a near fatal car wreck a few years ago. There's this strip of road here called River Road that's 35 miles an hour for most of it. that, well, I actually don't know if it's for most of it, but for one of the most busiest strips of it. And it's undivided, one lane each way. And there's turns, classic dangerous roads. And basically this guy near head-on collisioned me. I turned at the last second and he hit my door. I didn't black out or pass out, but naturally you go into shock. Everything's kind of a blur. And I crash into a fence or something. The short version is basically they jaws of life to the door off my car. Thank God for side deploying airbags. I then got ambulanced off to the hospital and had luckily the injuries, no severe neck or back or anything, but the type of wreck was one of those things where the police showed up and they said they expected a DOA based on the car wreck they saw.
Wow.
So thank God for modern engineering, y'all. It was very lucky. I was driving my mom's car at the time because my car was in the shop. So I got lucky in that regard. But yeah, basically I have a nice gnarly scar that they'll not be able to see on audio, obviously. But I cut my arm all up on glass, and I was discharged from the hospital that night. I didn't have to stay overnight or anything. No crazy story of having to relearn walking, but just very, very lucky to have a very severe car wreck in which I was able to walk away.
Yeah. Wow. What kind of car were you in?
It was an older 5 Series BMW from like 2008, 7.
Okay.
And so, it was about a 10-year-old car, but it had side deploying airbags. And the guy, the thing I wanted to kind of mention was in my little 30-second soapbox, if you don't mind.
Sure.
The guy admitted fault because he was looking at his cell phone and just crashed into me on an undivided road in 6:00 at night. And I was actually on my way to record a podcast with my buddies Ryan and Josh, which I'm sure I'll talk about later. I'm not going to start inserting plugs in the middle of your show, but I was on the way to record, and I still remember I get hit. And first thing I do, because you're in shock and you don't think about important things, was I text them. I just go, "Hey guys, I was just in a wreck. I think I'm okay. I'll talk to y'all later. Record without me." Something along those lines.
Yeah.
That was the first thing I did, which is the most just disproportionate response. Not even disproportionate, the most inappropriate thing to do at the time. Not calling the police. Yeah, so this guy admits, though, looking at his phone, and I just want everyone to know, like, I've done it. And even after this, I still feel the pull and occasionally am bad, and constantly remind myself, don't look at your damn cell phones, please, especially on undivided roads.
Yeah.
But like, it's amazing how quick it happens. I was fully focused on the road, and it's just got to get that little PSA out. Please, it's not worth it. The guy, I could tell, was genuinely mortified at what happened. And all he was thinking about was, what if I'd killed this guy?
Yeah.
So please keep that in mind. Drive safe. Watch those Werner Herzog short documentaries about texting and driving. Whatever you got to do, be safe.
Yeah. Yes. Was he hurt at all?
No, he was perfectly fine. It's kind of vague. Pretty sure actually some passerby stopped and pulled over and helped me. I didn't call the police. I didn't call an ambulance. Someone else did. I do remember some stranger helped out and left me their number and was like, "I saw it. If anything happens, please let me know." So shout out to all the kindness of strangers out there.
Yeah. Okay. So you've already gotten into sort of what prompted you to leave when you did, because you were on your way to go record a podcast episode. But what was the split second before the impact like? Did you realize what was about to happen?
I remember, I'm pretty sure I was turning right. Like it was a right hook. And I think I was listening to like Blurry Photos or some podcast like that. I can't remember though. I'm pretty sure I was listening to a podcast, because basically at that time, that's all I did was like research podcasts. And I remember hearing a horn honk. I don't know if it was me hitting the horn, but it happened very quickly.
Okay.
It was like, I don't even remember registering it. I don't remember, it was the next thing I knew, I was like in a fence, like kind of like in this metal chain link fence with my car. And just like looking around, I'm covered in glass, and I'm just like, okay, Rule number 1, don't move.
Yeah.
It was very quick. Typical answer. It happened so fast.
Yeah. Okay. So next thing you know, you're sitting there with glass and you're not moving and you think to text your friends.
I still can't believe I did that.
But then was there anything else that was going through your head? And in the time, I guess, between when you sort of came to or like realized where you were and then the ambulance got there or the paramedics got there, what happened in that time?
Honestly, I do distinctly remember being like, okay, I know I'm in shock. I'm not feeling pain. And there's a distinct possibility I could pass out without any warning. Like I remember very much like all synapses firing, being like, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? What do I need to do? Right? Like these moments are very important. And so after I did the stupid text message, so I called my dad and I was like, hey, I was in a car wreck. It's really bad, but I think I'm okay. I need you to, this was actually shortly after the ambulance came because the wreck was actually very close to the hospital. And so luckily I didn't wait very long, but I called my dad and I went, I don't know if I'm going to pass out or what. I need you to call my girlfriend at the time, who is not my wife, and say, hey, just let her know what's up. He was like, okay, tell me, what hospital are you going to? Where are you? Like, he's like, rattle off these details I need. Cause he was in the same boat. He's like, yeah, you might just pass out. So let's get critical information was like the entire name of the game. I've actually never passed out in my life. And when I was in the ambulance, I do distinctly remember them talking to me. And I kind of end the phone call and they say, okay, how are you doing? And I start kind of talking a little like, I just start slowing down and losing it. And they nuke me with air conditioning. They have this just frigid air AC. I'm like, like shock me back up. I'm like, oh, I'm good. All right. Like, yeah, you need to stay awake for us, buddy.
Gotcha.
Wheel me in. So it was mainly, what do I do now? Call your dad, get the information out. Don't do anything stupid. Don't try to get out of the car yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So can you describe for us a little more about how you were saved? So you said the jaws of life came in and then you went on an ambulance ride. Once you got to the hospital, like what did that entail as far as saving you?
Yeah. They pried the door off, got me in the ambulance. They kept me up. And then it was actually a lot of waiting around at first. Then I actually got moved to a different hospital, and just because huge wait times and stuff. And it also was like, technically it fell under emergency, but I wasn't at risk of dying, right? My arm was not in good shape, but it wasn't, again, neck, back. I wasn't unconscious. Mm-hmm. So I transferred to another hospital and waiting around a little while. It was mainly just a very painful process. This might be a little graphic for people, so heads up, of plucking glass out of my arm. There was a lot of glass in there because those windows are designed to shatter so you can get out in a, if you fall into the water. And I had some fat exposed to my arm, no bone or anything, because I actually do remember, that reminds me, in the ambulance ride, they said, hey, how squeamish are you? Because I asked them how bad it is. And I said, well, if it's white, don't tell me. And they said, they go, well, how do you feel about yellow? I went, well, that's not great, but I can live with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, they basically brought me in, plucked all the glass out, cleaned it out. Oh, tons of stitches. I don't remember exactly how many. My scar is probably 1.5 inches, 2 inches. And it's basically a little above my elbow, most of the way up my forearm. That might not be 2 inches. I'm so bad at guesstimating distances. Anyway, point being, it was lengthy, and yeah, they just cleaned it up, got me home, and basically I was just like, okay, let's have this scar heal. Another time when I went to those podcast recordings, we always would hang out after, and we were all chilling in our buddy's garage, and we were playing a little beer pong just to, whatever. We hadn't done that in years, and someone suggested it. We're like, yeah, sure, why not?
Uh-huh.
So I lean on the table, and all of a sudden I kind of get a weird sensation. I'm like, that doesn't feel right. And it was like 3 weeks later, and I ended up getting my shoulder checked later, and I had a post-labral tear. So the impact into the side of the door, we didn't realize at the time. I guess the initial checkup with the doctor didn't catch it. Mm-hmm. It's actually a common baseball injury from pitchers who throw. So
Okay.
it's below the rotator cuff. So I had the shoulder injury, and then cue months of physical therapy and workouts to strengthen the muscles around it. Luckily, I didn't have to get surgery. It's still technically on the table. I can get it, but I think it's healed pretty decently. I can do the bench press and deadlifts, so
Yeah.
I think that's good enough. I don't feel like having someone dig around on my shoulder if it's not causing me that many problems.
Right, right. Yeah. So, Greg, I don't know if you are a spiritual person, but did any spirituality come into play during this whole experience for you?
It's funny you bring that up. I actually haven't thought about this in a long time, so well done. Less God, spiritual religion. I always like this phrase. There's this professor at my college who had a course called Spiritual But Not Religious.
Mhm.
And it was kind of, and I like your language in particular, because there's definitely this weird, almost guilt after, because you always hear these stories of near-death experiences or surviving cancer or all these things. And that made it sound like those are not big deals. But a lot of times you find these people, maybe they don't turn their life around, but they go on to start foundations, or they quit their job and do what they love, or they do rebuild relationships with lost family members. These very inspiring stories of kind of turning a corner, and this horrible event that you survived or dodged or whatever is the catalyst.
Mhm.
And there's definitely this kind of hang up I had for a while of like, should I feel and be different? It was weird. It was a very strange sensation. And again, I really haven't talked about it since the wreck. I felt that for months of just like, anytime I would have a hangover like anybody has in their 20s, right? Or anytime you just waste time on social media, I'm just like, shouldn't I have like had this awakening that made me not piss away time, and life is so precious? And what's funny is, I do think I got everything I was going to get out of it that could be positive. I think that I have a greater appreciation for my physical capabilities. I think I have just the ability to use my left arm. Like, I have a 6-week-old son and I can hold him. That was put in jeopardy.
Yeah.
I could pick up a camera 2 months later. My left arm where I got hurt, that's where I hold the lens and pull focus. I could have lost the ability, not just to do my job, but to do the thing I love.
Hmm.
And I'm not trying to be over dramatic about it, right? Because I do think about that a lot, and it didn't fundamentally alter the person I am, but I do think it gave me an appreciation. So maybe it wasn't a spiritual thing, but I definitely did try to think about the larger consequences and what is the larger impact of all of this. I don't know.
Hmm.
It's a good question. I wouldn't say I found God or anything, but I was raised Roman Catholic. I live in New Orleans. You're all Baptist or Catholic here. You obviously think about that stuff, but I'd say just on the most basic level, I definitely think it did some recalibrating, even if it didn't fundamentally alter me.
Yeah. Maybe you were already on the path you were supposed to be on.
That's a nice thought. I honestly never thought of that. I like that. I want to use your answer.
Yeah.
I was perfect. I didn't need a car wreck to tell me to shape up.
Well, I want to hear about your support system and
Sure.
your healing process. What were both of those things like?
My parents were obviously great. Having doctors privilege is not the word to describe that. I am so lucky in that I don't face the same healthcare adversities that other people, not to get too political, but like, I think we mostly agree that the American healthcare system is difficult to navigate. And I've been so lucky that I didn't really learn that until I was older, until like college. I was kind of insulated from that reality. And my parents were just instrumental. I don't know how to handle health insurance properly. I never had to file a claim before, not for like a serious wreck. I mean, it's one thing to go provide health insurance and get medication you need. It's another to like fight with insurance and go through all this stuff. And I mean, to have my parents there to help me was just instrumental. And they knew how to talk to doctors, and they weren't involved. They didn't piss off doctors or anything, right? They just were like, hey, show me those x-rays too, and we can help you make these decisions. And my now wife, obviously huge. I mean, just moral support, loving, helping me when my arm was kind of out of commission, helping me just do basic things. I mean, I couldn't really type and do normal things for a minute. It wasn't like I was in a cast for 3 months, but there's a lot of basic things you can't do. So having someone who can just change out ice packs or help you with prepping things for a shower and all those things, those little things really fall through the cracks if you don't have someone who's there and loves you and really is putting in all that time and energy to help you. And she was just so gracious. I don't know. So big shout out to her on that. My friends were great. My colleagues were great. I had a job the next day, and we were able to scramble and get someone in, and they covered for me. They really didn't want to do the job. I remember we had trouble hiring for it, but he was just like, yeah, I've got you. I guess I'm so lucky to have friends and family that the answer was yes. There was no discussion for anything I needed, whether personal, professional, whatever. I'm very lucky in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. So can you describe your healing process for us? What was that like?
I was very concerned so working in the film industry, especially at that stage of my career, it's all referrals. It doesn't matter how, you've got to be a legend for it to not be referrals and for people to just cold call you, right? You got to be like Roger Deakins and people, maybe not that intense, but it's not traditional. And like, we're perpetually applying for jobs. If you think about it, we're never stable. So I was very concerned with this idea that if too many people knew I was hurt, they wouldn't call me. And not because of anything out of spite. It's not like they're mad at me or something. It was just, they're like, oh yeah, Greg's out of commission. He was in a car wreck. So I actually had to kind of be quiet about it. And the people I did tell, I was like, you cannot talk about it. I was like, I didn't post that on Facebook, or I didn't really post stuff about it. I was very like, I mean, maybe it should just be a personal experience anyway, but the point being that I had to kind of keep it quiet. So part of the healing wasn't just my arm recovering, which wasn't as severe as you'd think. The PT was a problem, and shout out to the Tulane. They did an amazing job. My doctor was amazing. I saw improvements so fast. I was having these aches every day, and then it reduced to, now I get my shoulder hurt every like 3 or 4 months. Mm-hmm. So the healing process wasn't so bad, just a lot of work for a few months. It really was just about kind of like, don't let this affect your professional life, dealing with the insurance. It was a lot of just mental energy and a lot of time.
Yeah.
Maybe it sounds a little spoiled to me, but I'm just like, dude, it just sucks. Like, I don't want to it's bad enough I was already in a car wreck. I don't want to deal with all this crap.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the healing was just a lot of getting my life back on track.
Okay. Was there any emotional or mental aspect of it where you became afraid of being in a car, or maybe other people being on their phones or anything like that?
River Road. I didn't drive on it it's a major way to get places out towards the certain area of New Orleans along the river. It's a primary way. So I would have Google Maps or whatever directing me towards it. And I'd be like, nope. I didn't probably drive on it for over a year. I drive it now, but like, if it's dark out, I'm 50-50 shot I just won't.
Gotcha.
I would say that's the most concrete example.
Okay. Well, how did you decide to go back on it?
Convenience and laziness. You get further away from things. Human beings were so amazing at adapting and accepting circumstances. And a part of you is just kind of like, well, what's the chance it'll happen again? Right?
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. It's human nature.
I'll feel like a fool if it happens again. But I mean, I do definitely like, when I'm on it, I am just eyes glued, paying attention. I try to take what's called Jeff Highway generally to get out there, unless I'm like really pushed for time. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just the typical, we accept things, we make pledges to ourselves all the time. I'll never do X again or Y again. And you're doing it a month later and you're like, well, I didn't really mean it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's okay that you got back out there. You don't really have control over what other people do. You can only control your own actions, and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. So you mentioned earlier, you've talked a lot about your career, podcasts, filmmaking, things like that. Where can people find your stuff if they want to hear more from you and see all these amazing things you're doing?
Well, before I start the shameless plugs, I really appreciate you having me on. I hope these answers were helpful. I hope people find something relatable. I feel like I ramble a lot. Probably don't feel like it. I think that's just reality. But I do appreciate you having me on, and I hope this was helpful and useful, and I hope it's a story worth telling.
Absolutely.
Well, you've been a very gracious host. So yeah, I have a lot of irons in the fire. I got to give a shout out to Josh and Ryan again, the guys I was going to see when the car wreck happened. So we have Rumor Flies. It's a podcast that's kind of like Snopes meets Mythbusters, but a little more comedic and a lot fewer degrees. It's less Sasquatch and JFK assassination and more anti-vax myths or, which by the way, we are very pro-vaccine. Sorry if that people don't like that. And can you do a citizen's arrest, right? All these things you hear at bar tops, which by the way, you can do a citizen's arrest, but it's a terrible idea and you'll probably get sued.
Okay.
So the other show's Jacks of Trades. It's a comic book review show. Mike and Davis are amazing. They do such a great deep dive into the books, all the context. They parse it with all these amazing social cues and just reads that just blow me away. I didn't even read comic books until I started producing their show, and now I can't read enough of them. And my most recent show is We'll Be Right Back, The Future of Hospitality. It's a podcast I launched with my sister and our colleague and friend Barry about how New Orleans' service and hospitality sector is navigating and kind of charting a path forward in the wake of COVID-19. That's been a very interesting project, and we've had a lot of great support. So if any of those sound interesting to y'all, please check them out. They're all pretty Googleable, and I'm gregtilton.com's got a bunch of my stuff.
Awesome. Well, guys, all of that will be in the show notes if you want to go get those links. And Greg, I know you said no phones while driving, but do you want to reiterate that? What is some closing wisdom you can leave for our listeners?
It can wait, right? Again, I got to give a shout out to Werner Herzog. He did this series with AT&T about texting and driving that's just soul sucking and makes you just feel guilt rattled for every time you even peeked at your phone. So I am a hypocrite. I still occasionally do it. I can't sit here and lie to y'all about that, right? It's hard. Our phones are an extension of us now, but I really try to be aware of it. We've really got to work on it. A lot of lives can be saved. A lot of injuries can be avoided. I'm not just here to guilt you. We all know this. Just please, please, please pay attention to the road. It's so important.
All right. Thank you so much, Greg. It has been an absolute pleasure today.
And thank you again. This was wonderful. You're a great host, and I appreciate you indulging me.
So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Tune in weekly at onbeinghumanpodcast.com for more soul-exposing explorations of what it means to be human. Until next week, love to you all.